Good morning, everybody. Let us start with a session on AI power, global perspectives. Now, it may come as a surprise, but neither me nor Dame Wendy Hall are Chinese. And you may have expected a Chinese speaker. Unfortunately, Yi Zheng, who was planned for this session, cannot attend due to quite severe health issues, so we wish him all the best from here. So we're very sorry he cannot be here. And since we have a strict in-person only policy, I'm very glad and indeed very happy and also honored that instead we'll have a conversation here on stage. Dame Wendy Hall, who flew in from the US and is not yet retired, as we would like to emphasize.
There's a rumour going around
There's been a rumour.
This is not true, and it was started by this lady at the front.
She took the burden of coming in early today, and it's a great pleasure having you. Thank you very much for coming to Vienna. Those of you who don't know Wendy Hall, she's a true Londoner. She was born in London, grew up in London. She's now the Regius Professor of Computer Science at the University of Southampton, and many other things. And we'll talk about this here on stage before we dive into the question of global powers. Wendy completed her Bachelor of Science in 1974 and the Doctor of Philosophy in 1977. That's
50 years in 2 years' time. I will have been a PhD. I can't believe it.
Still not retired. Oh. And the doctoral thesis was entitled Automorphisms and Coverings of Klein Surfaces. For those of you who really want to know, Klein surfaces are a kind of Riemann surfaces. And I was thinking whether we should have a debate about that, but then I thought maybe not. So I looked it up and I thought probably not.
I could give you a good talk on that.
I'm sure you can. I'm just not sure it's the right audience. So much later, and this is where your CV, at least for me, where it really got interesting, is you worked, let me make this lame joke, in a microcosm and on a microcosm. A microcosm is usually a small place or a society, a situation that has some characteristics of something larger. And for those of you who don't know it, in the case of Wendy, microcosm is something that is very much like the World Wide Web.
No, but it's better.
But it was actually better, but didn't exist when the web did not yet exist.
No,
Tell us a bit about it.
It existed when the web did not exist.
Exactly. Tell us a bit about it.
Well, Microcosm was I was of the hypermedia world, which is where I met Linda, because she was big in the hypermedia world, and other people here. Microcosm was a hypermedia system that ran on IBM PCs. So it wasn't of the internet, which is where Tim got it right. Mm-hmm. But the links were amazing. We did all sorts of different types of links. We treated links as first-class objects. And that's what Tim refused to do. And he was wrong. But anyway, he always said to me, Wendy, if you separate the links from the documents, people will lose them. And I used to say, but if you embed your links in the documents, they're not flexible enough to do what you want to do, which is the semantic web. Anyway, we have been friends for a long time, Tim and I. But I actually went to a talk, or I chaired a talk the other week, where someone from the Ministry of Defence was designing a new AI system. And they're using underneath the hood, what we used to call in Microcosm generic links.
Okay.
And he's just renamed them as Wendy links. That was 1989 we did that work. So we'll see. But of course, if I was a man, it would be my surname. Because I'm a woman, it's Wendy.
Yeah, right. We'll come to that
Women,
question.
you get that, don't you? You understand. Slightly patronising. But anyway, I accept it as the honour that it was meant to be.
Now, I should say this was not just academic work. Sure. This was also actually proper commercial work.
We spun off a company in 1994, which was the year I got my chair and the year that the web went big. And everyone said, we actually raised £12 million.
Yep.
in investment. And we did quite well for a while, but everyone used to say, but this web thing, it's free. Why do we need to pay for Microcosm?
Yes. There you go. In any case, in 1994, Wendy became the university's first female professor of engineering.
Yeah.
Was at that time, I mean, computer science has always been kind of modern and advanced, but was that still a big thing, being the first female professor at the university in engineering?
Yeah, well, it was the first female professor.
It was definitely big for you, but I mean, how was it received?
Well, I remember when computer science merged with electronics, we became electronics and computer science, and I walked into our first board meeting, and one of the electronics professors was overheard saying, they can't be engineers, they employ women.
Yeah.
He said at the meeting.
Yeah.
So, you know, I mean, it was. I was the only female professor of engineering at Southampton for another 10 years. Yeah. And Southampton's not a bad university, right, in terms of doing diversity and stuff. But in those days, there were actually. I'll tell you another little story, which is that there's a little meme going around. You should try it. Who was the first female professor of computer science in the UK?
Okay.
Try it on any of your AIs, and none of them will get the answer right. Some of them say me, some of them say Ursula Martin, some of them say Marta Kowalski, which certainly wasn't her, she's a lot younger than us. And I'm not going to tell you the answer. But it's a really hard one for AI, because the answer isn't... It isn't out there, so it gets it wrong every time. But it was a male-dominated world, and I'll have to say it still is a male-dominated world.
Oh, yes.
Look at the tech bros.
I think we can confirm this in this country, definitely. Now, in 2006, you mentioned Tim already. For those of you who don't know who Tim is, I guess you referred to Tim Berners-Lee, with whom and a few other people you founded the Web Science Research Initiative in 2006.
Yeah. That's 20 years next year.
Which then at one point was relabeled the Web Science Trust. And I should say that from the Association of Digital Humanism, we are really proud to also have a collaboration with the Web Science Trust now, together with the Digital Enlightenment Forum and the People-Centered Internet. We formed the Humanity Internet Alliance, which is still to grow and actually do something, but we'll manage that. But tell us more about the Web Science Trust. Hannes told me this really is your masterpiece.
Well, I don't think Tim would say that. Tim would say he invented web science. Right. He did, actually. At his keynote address in Amsterdam, when he got his Turing Award, he actually said he invented web science. It was a team thing. I talk about teams, but I am one of the ones that I have led it on. Forward from 2006 a lot. So basically we realized, this was when Tim was trying to get everybody to think about the semantic web, which is something he talked about in his very first keynote at the first web conference in 1994. But it wasn't taking off. RDF was there, the semantic web wasn't taking off. And so we, being Tim, myself, Nigel Shadbolt from Southampton then, and Danny Weitzner, a lawyer from MIT, worked with Tim, we started, we had many meetings sitting in Tim's office at MIT, writing on whiteboards and thinking about why the web had taken off, what had caused the web to become so explosive, because by 2006 it was getting very big. 2006 was, Google was there, Facebook had just started, Twitter hadn't started, so it was before the big social media, but it had gone on to our mobile phones effectively then. And we looked back and we started to chart it all, and then as we were trying to think about how we'd get the semantic web to go the same way, and then we realized actually that this thing was not just about technology, it was about people. Whereas the internet is largely about how computers talk to each other, the web was about how people talk to each other. And so we started thinking about it from a socio-technical perspective. And it took us a long time to come up with the name Web Science. There's two things I hate about that name, web and science. But it was the best we could come up. We wanted to call it network science, actually, because it wasn't just about the web, but that phrase had already been taken, and Sandy Penton had got connectivity science, and And science puts the social scientists off because they think it's about sums.
Yep.
But anyway, it's what we use and it's what we launched with, and we've stuck with it.
Someone must have understood, however, that it's important, because you were nominated for your nomination for the Royal Society actually reads, distinguished for your contribution to understanding the interaction of humans with large-scale multimedia information systems and the society, to make this short.
Well, if you know anything about the Royal Society, you'll know that anything I'd done before web science was what counted for my Royal Society. They go back a long way.
Yes.
Right?
And indeed, already by 2000, you had been appointed Commander of the Order of the British Empire, promoted to Dame Commander of the Order of the British Empire. Seems a very subtle difference to me, but I know nothing about this.
Oh, it's a big difference.
Right.
Well, because you put Dame in front of your name.
Yes.
And there aren't many of us.
Okay. Excellent. Yes.
Especially in science and technology, there are very few.
And to conclude this walk through your CV, in February 2013, you were assessed as one of the 100 most powerful women in the UK by Women's Hour on BBC Radio 4,
Yay!
If that means something. Right. And among other things, you were ACM president, which I think is also an outstanding achievement. But let's talk a little bit more about why we're here before.
I was very proud to be ACM president.
Oh yes, and rightly so. So let's talk about AI and big tech.
We have another ACM president.
Yes. Oh yeah, this is an ACM presidency here. Let's talk a bit about AI and big tech. I mean, from today's perspective, looking back at the history, is this an unavoidable route that we've taken, or could it have been avoided?
I blame Sam Altman. I don't know whether Sam Altman will go down as hero or villain in history, if we're still all around to write it, and not the AI. But I've been involved. I wrote my first AI code in 1994, Prologue. Those of you remember Prologue.
Yes.
And it's been around. We don't have to go through the history of this. Well, anyway, we've been around a long time, in various guises, with various winters and various sort of waves forward. We all remember expert systems, knowledge-based systems, blah blah blah. And we could see that the neural networks were getting the. Coming to the fore, machine learning was coming to the fore because of the power of the computers and the data that was available to train them. And we saw the generative AI, or as it was called then, I can't remember, foundational, was it originally, before it was called LLM, or it was foundational models, wasn't it, they called it? We saw it coming, and there were, it's no coincidence that the companies promoting this AI are the internet companies, because they've got A, the data, and the engineering ability to scrape the internet every day, day in, day out, and they have all the data they collect from us anyway, and they've got deep pockets. The newcomers on the block were OpenAI, which originally, I'm sure you all know this, it was originally a not-for-profit, and still is technically in some way nobody really understands. And it was funded by Elon Musk for good. OpenAI was for good, and everything they did was going to be open. That was why they were called OpenAI. They aren't anymore, and Elon Musk, and then out comes the first version they started to talk about releasing was GPT-2, and they didn't I forget which year it was now, during COVID. They didn't release it because they said it was too dangerous. They actually put out a big press release to say this stuff is too dangerous because it feels like you're talking to a human being, and it makes things up. Yeah. 6 months later, they released it as a GPT 2.0. I didn't hit the press as such, but you look at it and you think, well, 6 months ago this was too dangerous, and now you're releasing it. How what's? Of course, they were starting then to move to be a for-profit company. Elon Musk had gone, left all his money there, and that's what all the problem is between Elon Musk and OpenAI these days. And then in November 22, the ChatGPT moment, we're just coming out of COVID, and Sam Altman has the bright, I suppose it was him, his team, whatever, had the bright idea to put a very easy interface that anybody could use, download and use as the front end to GPT. And that was the ChatGPT moment, which has led to, everybody, the press, world leaders, seeing this stuff, and an acceleration, because then everybody had to speed up. Google, where much of the foundational work was done, had an existential threat. For a while, they had to speed up. Microsoft, of course, put money into OpenAI because they didn't have an AI offering, and it accelerated everything. And there was no this tech industry that we live in is completely unregulated. And unfortunately, we are going into the future in an unregulated industry. And it led everything to speed up. And now, of course, OpenAI is trying to make money. It only has deep pockets via Microsoft. We'll talk more about the future. But that was I don't remember what question you asked me, but that's my answer.
That was a good answer to my question. It was AI and big tech, so quite open.
And
but before we go to regulation, let's talk a little bit about, so how did this impact the power that these companies have?
Well, because, this is where I was going to go, because very quickly, from the companies themselves, it got picked up by the press. We got into this existential threat. Right, that AI, taken to the extreme of however you define it, and they move the goalposts all the time, they will tell you they've done AI, they're going for advanced general intelligence or super intelligence or whatever goalpost they move it to. But they set off this meme, they being both the companies, the press picked it up, of an existential threat. And not in 5, 10, 20 years' time, but in 2 years' time. This is 23, and they're talking about AI that could wipe out humanity in 2 years. That was what our government advisor said to the Times. And so we went into this existential threat mode instead of actually thinking about the things we really needed to think about, which is what was the impact of the technology in the next few years. How do we start to regulate it so that we can actually make sure that it doesn't wipe us out, or try to make sure it doesn't wipe us out if it gets super intelligent. And so we went through a phase where the tech bros had direct access to Biden. Our Prime Minister was Rishi Sunak, Modi, President Xi in China. They had direct access, and we're talking straight to them. Anyway, then that. Do you want me to go on?
Right, let's a little bit.
It led to some good things, but it was all based on, we, the companies, have the power here, right? We are developing this technology that could wipe all the people of your country out, all the people of the world out. So what are you going to do about it? Do you trust us? That's like, what? Biden's executive order that I know Trump wiped out was all about self-regulation. At least the EU, who had seen this coming, had been setting up their AI Regulation Act, which actually was written before all this happened and had to be fit retrospectively. But at least they were. I don't like the way the Act is set up, particularly, and I defer to lawyers who know more about it than I do. But at least they were thinking about it very seriously. And, the UK was too. We had our white paper on regulating AI, but, keeping innovation going, which just went, nobody listened to it or read it, because it was all in this big existential threat time.
But it is true that a lot of governments, including the UN, including the UK governments, now we're looking also for your help with on that.
So the UN's a different type of story, because things have moved. They move very, very, very quickly in this space. So basically, Rishi Sunak, who I know reasonably well, he's a very nice man. He wasn't the greatest prime minister. Did I? Well, we being
not
recorded?
The longest either. But.
No, not well. He wasn't as short as Liz Truss, but anyway, he's a very nice guy and well-meaning. But he was just taken over by the tech bros, and he said, oh, we're going to have this safety summit, right? We had the Bletchley Park Safety Summit, which was very dominated by the tech bros. There were very few. I was one of the very few academics there. I think there were 6 professors in this summit. Okay. Something like that. And they had very few countries there, less than 30 represented. China was there. Yi Zheng was there. I know Yi Zheng very well, actually. I'm sorry he's ill. Anyway, and then the UK set up its AI Safety Institute, which is now the Security Institute. At the same time, the UN launched the Global Forum, which I was on, for a year's commission about what we do, and we could talk about that in a minute. But we had the Bletchley Park Summit, we set up, and other people started setting up, the US started a safety institute, other countries have, Western countries. This is all, the people in the global south, just forget it, you're not getting any of this, right? And that's what the UN thing was about. Mm-hmm. So, and then Rishi Sunak disappeared, and we had our new government in, and we all went off to Paris for the Paris Summit this February, where there was an agreement set up which the French put through with the Indians, who were having the next summit. And famously, the US, UK, and Israel, I don't know why Israel, but the US and UK didn't sign up to this agreement. The UN report came out, and we're all going off to India next February for the next summit. But in the meantime, the US has got a new president who has said, we're not only, I just want America to win this race, and I'm going to rule that nobody can regulate AI. And that's what he did. It gets worse and worse. On Thursday last week, President Trump said, no state in America can regulate anything in AI for 10 years. That's what his latest...
Which I think is now contested by some states.
Well, yeah, but I mean, it's the announcement that's, he's doing a lot of mad things. I know. And when none of us get a vote, well, few of us do. So you better make sure what you do in your next year. But anyway, so we are now, I have to say I'm the most worried I've ever been because, and I think this is what you heard from Larry yesterday, because we're now developing this potentially, well, first of all, let's say, the opportunities that the AI affords are fantastic, right? It is the most fantastic technology. It will help us do things that we couldn't possibly have done before in medicine, in science in particular. We will have breakthroughs that we couldn't have had. We will do things that wouldn't have been dreamt of being possible 50 years ago when I started my career. But it is also potentially very dangerous technology, and the race is on in a commercial sense to beat everybody else in an unregulated industry, which I think is incredibly dangerous.
Now, one other aspect, and you alluded to it, is of course now also the United Nations have become active. Is that a too diplomatic level, or will it actually change something?
Well, I'm very hopeful. It will keep flying the flag for global governance. Our report was called Governing AI for Humanity. It asked for global dialogue, global reporting, a bit like climate change on what's happening. It asked for support for the global south, whatever you want to call it, developing countries to use AI in what makes most sense for them, have access to it, so that it's not just seen as a for-profit thing. And also the raising of a fund to support that, a global fund. And I went to the UN, I literally went in and had a meeting with the tech envoy last Thursday in New York, and he's very positive, but in the context of a UN that is, they are in what they call a liquidity crisis because Trump has withdrawn funding. So they have no money to do much at all at the moment, and they have their critics too. I mean, they don't, we have several wars around the world that the UN really have no control in or of, and in terms of creating peace. And so they aren't. They are, you know, they're... And Trump has also withdrawn support from various UN agencies. So they're in an existential crisis. But the tech envoy, he was very positive. He's talking to he goes around talking to governments all around the world about the dialogue. I think the summits will move to a global dialogue. I hope that's the direction of travel. Get reports. But this stuff moves much more slowly than the tech companies are doing. I mean, actually, one of the saving graces is DeepSeek. Mm-hmm. You know, DeepSeek, the Chinese company, showed that you could do this stuff more cheaply.
Let's talk about China a little bit, because I think that's something Yiseng was supposed to be here for. But what's your take on China? I think we have a very bad understanding generally.
We do. I go to China a lot. I'm a distinguished visiting professor at Tsinghua. I know a lot of professors there and other places around China, and I know Yi very well. China is much... Okay, China has much better regulation on AI than we do. It has regulation on AI. But the issue, I mean, I've written about this in my book, the For Internet, so Kieran and I are now doing we're calling it the 5 aims, the 5 AI...
Let me just emphasize this. The latest book is called For Internets and was co-written with Kieran O'Hara, was published, I think, 2021.
Yeah. And we're just doing...
Definitely worth a read still.
It is, actually, yeah. It is still, well, as what does it, OUP say it has legs or something? Because we're going to do another version. They didn't know how to sell it because they sold it as a computer science textbook. Anyway. China, sorry. We do a whole chapter on China in that, but we're taking it forward into the way the geopolitics of AI is working out. China has much higher regulation, but the difference is that China can look at the content, right, and can control the content because you don't have freedom of speech. Now, we allegedly have freedom of speech, but I think we're losing it for various reasons. I say we being both Europe and America. I think it ironic that Trump is accusing the UK of lack of freedom of speech when I was there last week. The academics are changing the names of their departments, their grants, it's just so scary what's happening.
Professor Lessig ended up in tears yesterday.
Well, it's just, the US is the powerhouse of research in the Western world. I mean, I'll go back to China in a minute. And he's taking all the funding out of it, and the people are leaving because they can't get funding. And I hate to say it, but it's like when the Nazis were taking power in Germany and all the professors left.
We wouldn't know anything about this.
Well, you have to say it. I mean, you have to call it what it is, right? Yes. It's different reasons, but you can see US professors coming out of the US, especially the younger ones, who have a career to build and want to do the research that they, have been brought up to do, and that will destabilize things. But China's rather more Me Too in terms of research. They tend to take ideas, however, and incrementally develop them, right? And actually, their LLM technology is really good. And they dominate Southeast Asia in terms of, and other countries through their Belt and Road Initiative, with the way they've introduced the internet and the LLMs. And of course, their basic premise is the government can look at any content and control the content in ways we don't do in the West, although we are beginning to. But the other issue, the big issue that we talk about in Web Science and here, is the effect that this unregulated industry, which we have had because of freedom of speech. Anybody can do anything on social media, and look at the harms that has led to, and the harms that I was asked to go on the radio today to talk about the harms that mobile phones are doing to our children, and the access to social media, and all that's leading to, and you don't get that in China.
So
you know, this is, I mean, it's a big thing. You don't. It's actually a much safer place to be.
Yeah.
Because people know that they can't be awful to other people on social media because, you know, they'll get reported or the government they'll be committing a crime.
Let me ask you one more question, because we talked so much about regulation, but what type of regulation should this be? Or what's the right regulation? Which direction are we going?
Well, it's, I think we need to, well, a part of this is, it's all an experiment that we're actually, I always talk about the World Wide Web, the internet, as being an experiment that we ran, or Tim ran, on the world, and you can't undo it, all right? And so I think we can watch what's happening with the EU, and as I say, lawyers know much more than I about how that's working and not working, but I think it won't, clearly America's not going to adopt it, China's not going to adopt it, so it could leave a vacuum around Europe. But we need, what the UN report calls for is global dialogue. And I have to say, rather scarily, it's like climate change. You know, you need some global agreements that says, you know, at the top level, we're going to do this, agree to this. Then you regulate in your own country, your own culture, your own and that set of nation states, whatever, and that's where the laws will be passed and enacted. But of course, no, that's not true. I was going to say, of course, AI is much more interconnected, but the climate's pretty interconnected, isn't it? What we need is to have a pact with the tech companies, and I genuinely believe that we have to actually get them to test and evaluate their products before they release them. This has never happened in the tech industry, really, except in particular sectors, like the aircraft industry, say. Mostly, our planes do not fall out of the skies, thank heavens, because the technology that operates them is pretty foolproof, except for the couple of exceptions from Boeing recently. But we really, really nearly need to pin them down, and the only way to do that is through money. Through taxes, or maybe even through the investors. So I'm talking to some people who are in the city of London who have a lot of money to invest, and they want to invest in responsible AI, and they want their money to be used to say to the companies, you can have this money if you do this, 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 and this. And somehow it has to be a pact between governments and the companies, and us in some way. We have to be responsible too. Yeah. We can't just say it's just up to them.
I have to add that our new EU project will develop investment criteria for digital humanist
well, you see, I think this is absolutely crucial, because actually, when you get to the big companies, it is the investors, the shareholders that really, really dominate. The CEOs have to make sure the investors are happy.
So, finally, are you still optimistic?
I'm not as optimistic as I was last year, no, because we are potentially, not at the moment, the current generation of the technology doesn't present an existential threat, but as we add reasoning to it, and the agents, agentic computing, I hate that term, but as we add agents into the equation that can do reasoning, make decisions based on flawed generative AI. I mean, people talk glibly about hallucinations, but the way, this stuff has to make mistakes. Human beings make mistakes, so how can we build machines that don't make mistakes when they're having to, think about things that are not factual? Yeah. And, well, even if you get facts wrong, I mean, that's a stupid thing to say, because we all get facts wrong. We remember things wrong. We remember things differently, and we get things wrong. And we interpret things right? So I often get called the first female professor of computer science in the UK because the answer to that question is not on the internet at the moment. Actually, I wonder I should put it out, shouldn't I, as a meme, and see how fast the AIs pick it up. Because we know, Ursula, Muffy and I, you know the names, we know the answer, who it was. It's nobody it's not a person who has name recognition.
Yeah.
But the thing is, I know why the AI makes that mistake, because I was the first professor of engineering at Southampton, so it concatenates those two things and says Wendy Hall was the first professor of CS in the UK. You can see why it does it.
Yes, obviously.
A lazy journalist would do it.
Yes.
The same. So I think what I would urge you all to do is to, if you have access to your governments, is to get them to talk, get a visit try and think about how they could support the UN in this. Because I do think for having some general purpose, goals and ambitions to keep us safe, that is the only game in town.
Right. Wendy, thank you very much for this. There will be more opportunity to interact with Wendy in the session that George Metakides does, and this is why you should ask your questions there. You can ask one very short question.
No.
No. All right.
Definitely not.
So you were still working on that question.
Yeah, I love it.
Discuss it in the coffee break.
No, definitely. Karen, by the way, was totally, she was not made a professor till a long time into her career because Cambridge wouldn't give her a chair.
Nice.
She was amazing. Yeah. Amazing. I'll come back to you on, but it wasn't her. No, definitely not.
I just remember her name.
Yeah.
Wendy, thank you very much for being here, and on so short notice, it was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.
And Wendy also has a new hip, so it's the...
No, I don't need the stick. I need
probably the...
These are the worst.
Yeah, this is the worst, but I can tell you, you're not the first one struggling with these stairs.
Oh, dear.
This is like...
Thank you.
All good? Very easy. Thank you so much. Our next speaker in this, and I can tell you, difficult to design session, is Christiane Wendehorst. It's always a true pleasure to have Christiane in an event, because she is a real, not just a knowledgeable person, but also a pleasure to interact with, and it's a great privilege to know her and have her in this session. She was even willing to come here in different functions, so Christiane, thank you very much for this. Christiane, as you can read online, has been professor of civil law at the University of Vienna. She is the co-head of the Department of Innovation and Digitalization. We sometimes forget how the digital poses new challenges for the legal sphere, and Christiane really is working at the forefront of this and has been for a long time. And I think when you read through Christiane's CV, which I'm not going to do because I think it's something you can do for yourself, but you will find a long list of achievements, a long list of positions, but they don't quite tell you something about what motivates people and what they really do. And I found something which struck me as something that I find remarkable. Already in 1995, so that's a long time ago, Christiane completed her second state examination and received her doctorate with her thesis on the refugee in German international private law. And I think this is something where you immediately realize how important dealing with legal issues is. We all know it from our private lives, but of course it is something that matters in the digital sphere. But it is immensely complicated, and because of its international nature, for which we just don't have, I think, the right concepts yet. Another area where this is true and where Christiane is working on is anything that has to do with contracts, contract law. when was the last time you clicked on something and potentially entered into a contract? Christiane wasn't here yesterday when I think it was Moshe who asked for the nullification of all click-through contracts. And I think Christiane could give us a wonderful talk about that as well. But instead she will be talking about narratives of digital ethics, lessons learned from the EGID project, which was recently completed, and a fascinating project really fits the title of this session regarding the international perspectives. Christiane, it's a great pleasure having you. And the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Erich. It's a privilege to be standing here, but I feel a little bit awkward, I have to say, for several reasons. I mean, first of all, it's really difficult to speak after Wendy Hall. Then when we chose the topic, we thought that Yi Zheng would be speaking, and that would have been the perfect fit because the project I'm going to present right now was a project where Yi Zheng was involved. So he was taking kind of the Chinese part, representing the Chinese Academy of Sciences. And then it would be so much more tempting to chat now with Wendy about what it meant to be the first full law professor at the German law faculty in 1999. I could tell you stories you wouldn't believe, but anyway, maybe we find time in a coffee break, right? No, and thanks also mentioning contract law, Erich. In fact, the reason I couldn't be here yesterday, which I really very much regret, was that I was at a conference in Madrid on agentic AI, and I have written the first full set of principles on what AI agents mean for contracting, and I'm very happy that UNCITRAL, the United Nations Commission for International Trade Law, has taken it up, and they were there yesterday, and so we discussed what could be the way forward. So I really regret not having been there. Well, coming back to my original topic, narratives of digital ethics, lessons learned from the EGID project. So EGID stands for Academies for Global Innovation and Digital Ethics. So it was a project conducted jointly with, and I'm going to give you the list right on the next slide, a broad range of international academies of sciences, including the Chinese Academy of Sciences, represented by Yi Zheng. So what was really the research question all those academies embarked on? Well, the research question was why do we see that striking degree of convergence when we're looking at international sets of principles, of guidelines on AI ethics, data ethics, digital ethics, you name it? It starts with those FAT principles, fairness, accountability, and transparency, and then, you have catalogs of 3, 4, 5, or up to 10 principles or guidelines or whatever, and they all look strikingly similar. And it was particularly UNESCO work, where also Yi Zheng was involved, that demonstrated, well, there seems to be a potential for global consensus. While on the other hand, we see that great divergence, this really different approach to technology worldwide. So why is that? Why do we have this divergence? And as I already said, we had 10 collaborating academies worldwide, really leading academies of sciences. The Austrian Academy has a cooperation with. You will realize that not all countries are represented here. Most regrettably, the Indian Academy of Sciences first said they will cooperate, but it was so difficult they were so slow in nominating someone that at the end of the day, and the full range of experts from India were involved, and also other nations where we found we had a gap were kind of the gaps were filled up with experts from other fields whom we cooperated with. So this is not the whole working group, but it's the academies of sciences that conducted this research together with us. It was a huge privilege to have this lineup of academies of sciences. So what was the methodology we used? Well, we had qualitative interviews with 75 selected individuals from all parts of the world. We had workshops here in Vienna, and a couple of people in the room, I think, took part in those workshops. And then at the end of the day, we drafted a report that was then published last year. Now, we started with a working hypothesis. We thought, well, most likely there will be some different values, or maybe we already had a hunch that values would be similar, but we thought that probably if they share the same core values, the emphasis placed on values, and in particular, for example, the weight given to privacy may vary. And this is kind of a stereotype, right? That you say, okay, Europeans care so much about privacy, and US you don't, or China you don't, or whatever. All these stereotypes are around, and we kind of were a little bit on that track. The problem was, it was not supported by our data. Not at all. So we set out with a working hypothesis. We designed the interview guide in a way, to kind of fit our hypothesis. It just didn't work. Data didn't support it. That shit happens, right? So what we found out instead, and that's sometimes what happens in academics, that you come out with a result that it's entirely different from what you had expected you would find. We found, well, the difference is in something else, and it's really significant and could play a major role, and that's the narratives surrounding digital ethics. So at the end of the day, we changed also the title of the project, we changed the title of the report, so the focus was now on narratives on digital ethics. So I can't give you, of course, the whole set of findings. I will focus on what is here in our part C, because I think this is maybe particularly relevant. It's also relevant to explain some of the things we're now seeing at EU level in terms of regulation. So I've been involved in EU regulation for the past 10 years. I had the privilege to kind of be involved in one or the other function in the preparation of a whole range of pieces of legislation. And what I'm seeing right now, what is happening, or not happening rather, is very much in line with the findings of our report. And this is why I think it's really important to discuss at least. So what we did was a little bit unusual maybe and controversial. We built a kind of matrix, or like a Lego set, right, of narratives. So a narrative is a story. It's basically storytelling. And stories usually start with a protagonist and somebody, the good guy, and then an antagonist, the bad guy, and then there is a conflict. Something happens between the good guy and the bad guy, usually like the bad guy trying to shoot the good guy or whatever. And then, there is a solution at the end of the day, so how to solve the conflict, what to do. And in terms of digital ethics, or let's rather say, and that's more in line with the title of this conference, when we're talking about a good digital future, usually the stories take this kind of structure, whom are we concerned with? What is the problem? What's happening between whom we are concerned with and what the problem is, and what should we do at the end of the day? So that's very much how these narratives work. Okay, and we tried to fit all this into a matrix. So we started, and that's maybe a little bit, today with hindsight I would do it a little bit differently, but anyway, we started with, the fundamental ethical assumptions. The reason why maybe I would with hindsight do it differently is that it's normally not what people tell you up front. So nobody would in an interview, for example, tell you, I have a deontological view of, what the good is, and nobody would say that, right? And nobody would tell you about that they believe in material idea of equality of more formal ones. So nobody would say that. So it would never be explicitly part of the story. It would just indirectly be revealed by the way the story is told. So what is the kind of notion of the good? What is the kind of notion of fairness? Okay, probably now I would maybe not include it in the matrix or whatever, but we did it, and maybe it's good we did. Okay, what is more important is now, and this is really the key, is who is the protagonist of the story? Who is or what is the primary reference point of the narrative? And then, as importantly, what is the position of that primary reference point vis-a-vis technology? So, is the primary reference point ecology? With ecology, we mean ideas that do not just put the community to the focus, but the community plus the living or maybe non-living world around us. That's what ecology means. Is it community, society, or is it the individual or individuals? So community seen as individuals. And then, what is the position of this reference point vis-a-vis technology? Is it is the reference point a beneficiary? Is it a victim put at risk? Or is it an actor embracing opportunities? And this is where the story told will usually start. And the choice of the protagonist and the perception of their position vis-a-vis technology is absolutely crucial for how the story goes. And the same holds true, of course, for the choice of the main perceived antagonist and of what the conflict is. So are we primarily concerned about prosperity, about being marginalized? Is it that we're concerned about harm, of our safety? Is it we're concerned about autonomy, a lack of freedom? And who's the bad guy, right? Is it governments? And this is also something I would phrase differently today. I would maybe, anyway, countries or governments, I would write now. Is it the tech industry? Is it other users? So this is really crucial. And of course, changing just one block will often change the meaning of all the other blocks. For example, if you take a risk autonomy government story, right? Or risk autonomy countries story. And if you start that with community as a protagonist, this would mean like our community is at risk because other countries, governments kind of take away our freedom. This is an entirely different story compared with the story if you start with the individual as a protagonist, right? So this would then be the individual is put at risk, and it's the individual lack of freedom, and the government in this case could be really the government threatening that individual. So it's just a fundamentally different story. So it really matters where you start and where you end up. And the story usually ends up with a reference to policy choices and governance tools, which again can be very different. So there's some stories we found were about, culture and education. Others were about law, regulation, or technology and the economy. And also, what is the factor that gives legitimacy to governance tools? Is it organic evolution? It is determination by the able. Could also call it paternalist approach, or is it self-determination? Okay, so what did we come up with? And it was interesting to see that, of course, when you look at regions in detail, and if you look at it, societies, if we start a survey about narratives that are, told by people in this room, we would probably come up with as many narratives as people in this room, because everybody tells a different story, right? And also, when you look at a society, societies are not homogeneous. So we did some, we zoomed in, for example, on India and identified groups within the Indian society and their narratives about digital ethics. And we came up with entirely different narratives. So that's all fine. The point was, despite this diversity on the ground, there turned out to be main predominant narratives that kind of were driving forces over a longer period of time in a particular region. And these were those narrative patterns we primarily focused on, and we came up with 5 main narrative patterns. So one type we call the coloniality type narrative pattern. It was really difficult giving them names because we didn't want to associate them with particular countries for various reasons, because it might be felt unfair and because things are changing, as I'm going to say in a moment. So coloniality type narrative pattern, that would more or less start with the community society, the own community, as a starting point. It sees that community as a victim of digitalization, put at risk because other countries, now comes that problem, countries' governments are marginalizing our society, threatening our prosperity, and this is why we need to build our own technology and regain sovereignty. So that was a story that we found being told quite often, actually. So our community is at risk, it's marginalized, so we need to build our own technology. That was the active variant. Interestingly, we also found a passive variant of this coloniality type narrative pattern. It started the same way. Our community is at risk because it's marginalized by other countries, so we need strong international law to help us gain sovereignty. So that was a variant we saw. But still, the pattern is characteristic. Another characteristic pattern is what we call the beneficiary type narrative pattern. So it sees ecology, or you could replace that by the community. That's not so clear. Sees it as the beneficiary, and then, at the end of the day, everything's fine. We deal with everything with our culture. Our culture can embrace it. We deal with it through education. It's an organic evolution, a really, really positive attitude. Something like we are grateful for being able to use technology, sometimes combined with much of what we would not have been able to build ourselves, and trust it can be accommodated with our culture. The next one, which is really interesting and a major driver in several regions of the world, is what we at the end of the day call the harmony opportunity type narrative pattern, because it always started with the same building blocks, right? And there was not just one, there were several variants. For example, China and Japan had their own variants. China associated variants would start with harmony, virtue, ecology and stuff, and then see themselves as actor opportunities. But this is the original. It's maybe not the current one, but it was this narrative was at least used to be the Chinese narrative for some time. At least this is what we were told. So our country is embracing technology to avoid or remove marginalization by other regions. So we need to develop our skills led by wise decision makers. Then, of course, what we call the Silicon Valley type narrative. So the individual is free to pursue success and prosperity with the help of technologies, and the economy will solve the problems we may have. So it's really interesting that this is so, on one side of the spectrum, and it's probably not too difficult to associate with a particular country. And now comes what we called at the end of the day GDPR type narrative pattern, GDPR standing for General Data Protection Regulation, and that is also a really characteristic one. So it's basically the individual and their autonomy are threatened by the tech industry, so we need regulation to guarantee individual self-determination. So this is a really strong narrative which we see in the EU basically. But also not just in the EU. Now, what is interesting is now that these narratives are not static. They are fluid to some extent. And I just give you, because my time is running out, I give you some aspects of where the fluidity lies. So what is really interesting that we see these dynamic beneficiary patterns turning into more active patterns. So this was the original beneficiary pattern. We are grateful for being able to use technology and so on. And we see that this is changing, that there are regions in the world that used to take a beneficiary position and that are moving towards a harmony opportunity pattern. So our country is no longer just using, but now actively embracing technology to improve our position and become digitally more sovereign or get a better position in the world. So this is a major shift we were seeing from the data we collected, which doesn't mean that is the case, it's just the data we collected, that seemed to be taking place. Another example for fluidity of narratives is what I could call the example of China's regulatory term, right? So I showed you the original Chinese pattern we perceived in our data. So this harmony opportunity, we need to embrace technology to become world leaders, really, but originally to remove marginalization, which we were marginalized by other regions, but really we want to become more powerful. And there's also another now regulatory narrative, which is totally different from the EU regulatory narrative. Our country is in risk from the tech industry's power grab, so we need to regulate the industry led by wise decision makers. So this is what's been driving, or seems to have been driving, according to our data, much of Chinese regulation recently. And this is a second narrative that's basically coming here. What about the US? Well, we saw attempts to establish something like turn this into the Silicon narrative pattern in something more like a GDPR pattern, but it's just unsuccessful, right? It just doesn't happen. It's just not happening. And then the case of the EU and what's happening there recently, EU starting, of course, with a clear GDPR narrative pattern. The individual and their autonomy are threatened by the tech industry, so we need regulation. And then, what about the artificial intelligence Act, does that fit here? Yes, it fits nicely. The Artificial Intelligence Act is basically following the GDPR narrative. You just need to tweak one little building block. You have to replace autonomy, lack of freedom, maybe only partly by safety. It's really both, right? It's autonomy, freedom, and safety, maybe just both. And so it really fits very nicely into the narrative. The problem starts with the rest of the recent EU digital regulation. And unfortunately, I don't have time to go into the details, but the EU has been trying now for some time to kind of establish other narratives, like narratives of European digital sovereignty, or now the big new narrative under the new Commissioner von der Leyen, the competitiveness narrative. So everything is now under the heading of competitiveness, right? And the problem is really this would mean a major change when you look at the matrix. You would have to basically move all building blocks around. You would have to look a little bit less to the individual, more to the community in terms of maybe data solidarity, or we would have nice labels for it, right? Barbara Preinsack here from Vienna has worked a lot, and Nikolaus Forger on data solidarity. But so we have nice labels, but it just doesn't work out. We would need to shift from autonomy to prosperity marginalization. We would have to be not so much worried about the tech industry, but more about other regions of the world. It just doesn't work out. And so this is what is really, really problematic. Yeah, why is it problematic? Because what we are seeing in recent European regulation is that it's somehow half-hearted. They try to achieve a certain goal, like data sharing, opening up data silos for the European data economy, or removing red tape for European businesses, or whatever. So this is kind of the policy goal, but just it doesn't work out. And you can analyze the legislative process in terms of you can't escape the GDPR type narrative pattern. So you try to do something like opening up data, and you achieve maybe even the opposite or something entirely different, because you can't escape the GDPR type narrative pattern. For example, the way the EU tries to open up data for the European data economy by the Data Act, Data Governance Act, Digital Markets Act, you name it, is by data portability. Because you can't escape, because that means the individual has a right, the user has a right to port their data, because you can sell that as user empowerment, but you can't somehow do it differently. Or, and this is something I'm particularly involved with at the moment, we really need to simplify not just simplify, but we need to change our data protection law in the EU if we want to have both better protection of fundamental rights and a thriving European economy. So it would be really, really important we do something about it. The Commission accepted that it would be really important to do something about it. But what did they do last week? Well, they published a proposal that actually they just tweak a number in one of the articles of GDPR. It's just not really worth mentioning. Okay, I don't have the time to go into the details. Maybe we have the time for discussing it later, just to give due acknowledgement to who contributed here. You see Academy members and further great experts in the field. So to sum up, we thought we'd come up with the different emphasis and values, maybe on privacy. That was not the case. What we came up with was we have different narratives, and those narratives may be powerful drivers of collective behavior and policy making. The dominant narratives are not necessarily static, they may be fluid, and a major shift we're seeing is that shift from beneficiary to harmony opportunity or actor opportunity pattern, and that means a lot for many regions of the world, actually. And in some regions, predominant narratives are so deeply entrenched that it's really difficult to bring about change, even where the policymakers make an effort to do it. For example, the current effort to establish a competitiveness narrative, a European digital sovereignty narrative, is simply possibly failing because it interferes with the GDPR narrative, and it's so difficult to change the narrative. So thanks for having the opportunity to present this research, and I'm happy to, I don't know what the plan is, to answer a few questions, but anyway. Can I thank you? Okay.
Want to thank you so much. Really explaining the world to us, literally. Beautiful. Do we have a mic? I think there was one here in the front was first. Yeah, Moshe after. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. It's very, very interesting. You know, it strikes me that in specifically with respect to these technologies, it seems to me to be a strategy of outrunning governments, right? So these tech companies, the tech bros, are moving deliberately at a very fast pace. And I appreciate the deliberate manner in which you and others, the UN, governments, or at least governments with a good intention, are trying to think about these things. But their strategy is just run too fast for you to catch us. And you know, obviously we're seeing that in the US now, even with the government trying to run so fast, nobody can catch them. So how do you imagine countering that strategy using these techniques to try to control what's going on?
I think that's a brilliant question. So that was not primarily the focus of our research, just to clarify. Yeah, right. So I think what Wendy Hall mentioned was I absolutely agree with what she said. Right. So we need to think about maybe a little bit more agile strategies. And in particular, you know, I said I was involved in much of the regulatory endeavors of the EU, for example, but I'm not at all fully enthusiastic about what came out, right? Because regulation takes time. We saw with the AI Act what happened, that was basically overtaken by developments while it was in the legislative process. It takes time. It follows its own logic. So, for example, we'll see what we always call the Christmas tree principle. So you start with a certain proposal, and then it passes through the legislative process, and everybody hangs onto the tree what they wanted to see, and what comes out at the end of the day is maybe something different than you thought it would be. And then also, it's really difficult to design legislation and regulation in a way that it really hits in a targeted manner those who want to target, and it doesn't cause collateral damage. So I basically can refer to what Wendy Hall said. So we need regulation, but regulation must be smart, it must be lean, it must be flexible, as technology neutral as can be. Following the established principles of technological neutrality, functional equivalence, and so on, and not, you know, fall into this trap of having these huge pieces of legislation that are so specific and then unclear and hit the wrong people. That's maybe something we shouldn't do.
Thank you. There's a lot of questions, so let's try to be quick. Moshe is next.
So I want to follow up on Alex's question and on my suggestion from yesterday. So regulation has no chance because they're moving too fast. And the regularist development by its nature is deliberate and contemplative and ask for comments. We have no chance. What I proposed yesterday is to nick up that industry. One reason they have a hold over us is because every time we use technology, probably before I use this mic, I click something and I agree to terms of services, to a license. If we nullify click-through contracts, poof, they lose a huge amount of power over us. Because a big part of legal power over us, we agreed always to use the services on their terms, written by corporate lawyers. Now, nullifying click-through contracts have no chance in the US because they have way too much power. Does it have any chance in Europe?
Well, I mean, first of all, I agree with you insofar as we could do a lot more, and this is why I said I'm not at all enthusiastic about much of the regulation. We could do a lot more with the general laws we have. Guys, there is contract law out there, there's tort law out there, there's competition law out there. Just do it. The problem is a little bit the mindset that people tend to think, courts tend to think, the industry tends to think, policymakers tends to think that this analog law, which we've been developing over centuries, doesn't work for the digital realm, but this is just nonsense. We could do a lot with what we already have. We just need to take it seriously and apply the law. And in that sense, I'm absolutely with you that just normal contract law could do much more than all this huge regulation we're maybe drowning in. But I'm not sure that prohibiting click-through contracts entirely, I think that would be rather a drastic measure, and I'm not sure it's sufficiently targeted. You know, it's not really targeted. It's again something that prohibits something that can be used for entirely legitimate purposes, and maybe hitting the wrong people. This is why I'm a little bit skeptical about the concrete measure.
Okay. The lady, thank you.
Yeah. So thank you so much for this amazing panel, Wendy Hall and also Professor Christiane. So my question is, I'm from Brazil. I would like to know the perspective, what do you think about, in terms of geopolitics of AI, where is the role of Global South in this landscape?
That's a brilliant question. I mean, I tried to demonstrate something. So the patterns of, on the one hand, coloniality pattern, on the other hand, beneficiary pattern turning into actor opportunity patterns, those were Global South countries mostly. And so we see these two attitudes, you know, the coloniality type attitude and this beneficiary turning into actor opportunity type attitude. And it's so interesting to see, and we don't know because we didn't have the data, it would need a longer period. It would be for me so interesting to see whether also the coloniality type narrative pattern develops into an actor opportunity pattern at the end of the day, because you could think, well, if that is successful, what they do, at least the active variant of the coloniality type pattern, that could beautifully develop into an actor opportunity type pattern. We didn't have the time and the data to do that. But we saw these very different attitudes, and we would need more time and options to see, you know, what happens in the long run.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Michael is very good at asking short questions.
But he wants also to make a short comment or a proposal. Christiane, with the rest of our digital humanism funds, we will rent an airplane with a banner. You know these banner airplanes where we write on it, use existing law. Yeah, we should take this really as a take-home message. Yeah. If we, the two of us, if we want to open up a Würstelstand in Vienna, a booth that sells sausages, we need to follow regulations. So the tech pros should also. My question is about these cultural differences. Yeah, Wendy has told us a lot about the prisoner dilemma in these international negotiations, and when one opts out, the one who opts out wins. Are the cultural differences you have experienced in the JIT project aggravated this problem, or can these cultural different worldviews be in deliberations be solved? Yeah, what's your experience with the JIT project?
Well, thank you so much. That's a great question. Actually, we tried to avoid the term culture as much as we could, because we felt a little bit unsafe with, ascribing things to culture, whatever that is. There was a little bit beyond our realm, and we just tried to stick to the data, and the data demonstrated that difference in narratives, but not much more. We would have needed more time and so on to go beyond. As I said, that there is that. Absolutely, we found that consensus in terms of values, in terms of emphasis on values. We found that consensus in terms of some core things, right? And therefore, I would be very optimistic at that level. It's just that when it comes to action, and it seems that, those values are not necessarily driving action, but that possibly those narratives are much more, what then drives many or explains many actions. There you suddenly have this broad divergence. So I think we need to do, while I'm optimistic about the common basis, I'm much less optimistic whether we will end up with a common narrative.
3 last questions. First one by Katja.
Yeah, hello. Thank you, Christiane, for this great talk. I want to come back to the narratives in the European Union. We were recently in Brussels, and there we had heard, especially from the side of the NGOs, that the GDPR is under attack. So this is the narrative that we heard in the last weeks. I would like to hear your opinion on that, please.
Well, now I need to be very careful what I say, because I'm together with people like Max Schrems, among those who really attack the GDPR as it stands, right? Because the GDPR is, sorry to say so, doing, I don't say a bad job, but not a really good job. It's not really hurting those the GDPR should target. I mean, did you notice that Meta or any of the other big companies changed a lot about their practices since the GDPR went into force? Not really. Did you notice that the local sports club and the parents association and so on more or less stopped doing what they can do? Yes, I did. I run, for example, I'm involved in several associations and so on, and we are drowning in data protection. For this project, we had like 1.5 years. The first half year we only spent with data protection. Just like that. And so it's not targeted enough, and this is why we need to have the ambition and the courage to say the GDPR was a great thing. It really changed the world and so on, but it's outdated, and we need to change it. Yeah, not totally, not do away with it, but just change it. And this is why currently there are different proposals on the table. I submitted a proposal, it's called the AI Data Protection Regulation, that tries to punctually modify it and make it a more targeted thing, so hit the big ones that do high-risk AI data activities, and just leave the small ones that do just low-risk data activities, leave them on their own. So I submitted a proposal. Max Schrems together with Axel Voss. They also build on my actual proposal, suggested now a somewhat different one. The Commission, as I tried to explain, didn't take up any of our proposals, but came up with something you could as well not do. Yeah. It's good you do it, but yeah.
We have Mark and then Professor Brook, and that's going to complete the round.
Okay, so with all respect, I would like to push back both on the methodology and on the conclusions. I've done a great deal of comparative work in legal systems, and we often look for formal outcomes. So if I was comparing the US views, the US culture on AI policy, I would put aside the Silicon Valley ethos. This is the view of a small number of very rich, very influential people. But it does not represent the position of the United States. The United States in 2019 led the effort at the OECD for the first global framework on artificial intelligence. That was under President Trump's administration, by the way. The United States was strongly supportive at the Council of Europe on the AI treaty. That was under President Biden. Public opinion polls show strong support across the US for more AI legislation, not less. California, the hub of innovation, last year passed 17 AI-related bills, and there are many more under consideration. Now, as for the 10-year moratorium, that was passed by the House. But I will be very, very surprised if it's adopted by the Senate and becomes law in the US. As a procedural matter, it's not related to budgetary issues and could be tossed aside. I'm sorry? No, the Senate decides whether to consider the matter under the Byrd Rule. But even apart from this, that's not relevant to what the Senate decides. Not relevant. And Republican senators, member of President Trump's own party, have expressed opposition. So my point here, if I may share with everyone, being I think one of the few Americans in the room, is that we have to be careful about this characterization of the US. I don't mean to diminish the extraordinary influence that the tech bro class has. It is ever present. But if we look at the actual outcomes and the policies that have been adopted, I think if we follow more formal methods, I mean, narratives are great and they provide insight and give us new language and understanding. But if we look at formal methods for comparative study in law, we will find a much higher level of alignment between the US and other countries than people are generally aware of. And this is actually a story that needs to be told, you see, because we've given so much attention, let's say, to Vice President Vance in Paris not signing the declaration, which was very unfortunate, and I would say self-defeating, while ignoring the tremendous amount of legislative activity. We had 40 state attorney generals, 40 of the 50, and this is Democrats and Republicans opposing state moratoriums. We had thousands of state lawmakers opposing this. So give us some time. It's a little difficult in the moment, but there's a lot happening.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mark.
So thank you so much. Just to be fair, when you look at the report itself, the report was published last year, and in the report itself, the description of the US is still a little bit different. The arrows are still in blue, and the question is still asked in the report, will the US move towards the GDPR narrative? So if you look at the report itself, the account is a different one because it was published last year and the data are from 2023, right? It's just that we didn't perceive, a full-fledged change in the underlying narrative in our data. As I said, it doesn't mean that maybe our data were flawed, maybe we picked the wrong people. It's just the data we had in the project. And of course, I updated it because under the Trump administration, we can't see chances of any kind of change of the main narrative. But you're absolutely right that we need to talk about the methodological limitations about this, of this, right? So it has severe methodological limitations. It was a project, and it was a snapshot, and it was, you know, with a limited number of people involved. It just was a tendency we perceived, and in 2025, we would see that you know, the main narrative hasn't really changed. But yeah, we could debate about that.
You can take this out over the coffee break. Last question, Professor Brook, please.
I'm sorry to switch this because I'm very much interested in, for instance, looking at the California Newsom legislation initiatives on AI. And also what Wendy was saying before, I mean, there's the AI for Good summit coming up in July now, and the WSIS process, which is looking at actually how to basically doing, oh, you see, good shirt, t-shirt. And there's a lot of initiatives on this. At the World Summit, the World Board of Directors, we had a discussion on digital humanism. And our friend from Brazil, Rodrigo Assumpção, who is the president of DataPrev, he said, you're talking about ethics, why don't you talk about taxes? So the freedom of speech is basically misused, as well as the freedom to basically not pay taxes. My question to you is in terms of the narrative of digital ethics, and also in terms of what Amardeep Deep and the other people at the UN are doing, the shift towards moving, you know, I mean, various different kind of ethical narratives. How do you see it related to shifting the taxing narratives? Because the taxing narratives would really address the economic power and the concentration of power globally, as well as country-wise. And that would be really interesting, at least in terms of advancing digital humanist, let's say, agenda beyond being talking about how to be good, to be basically, to be powerful. Thank you.
Well, thank you. That's a great point, actually. I'm afraid that, you know, tax is something many people consider to be so complicated and impenetrable that they don't really start thinking about taxes. And this is a problem. They should think more about taxes, and countries should be thinking more about these kind of tools. So I'm absolutely with you there. I'm just not so convinced that we will find a lot of narratives about taxes, because people try or tend not to think a lot about taxes, because they should, absolutely, they should, and unfortunately Trump is thinking about tariffs quite a lot, I have the impression. But no, they should, absolutely. But just, I think it would be a different, entirely different thing. It couldn't be about narratives, should be, this is about the tools we should be using, right? And what a region that thinks strategically, how a region with a strategic goal should, what they should be looking for. So I'm absolutely with you there.
Thank you very much. Let's use the coffee break to design some new taxes. Here we will be discussing platforms after the break as new institutions. In the Oval Hall, the next panel will explore the phenomenon of institutional mimicry. It's maybe something you haven't heard before. It's the practice of borrowing governance models from one domain and applying it to another, especially also in the digital realm. This is increasingly common, and the panel will discuss the pros and cons. Let's thank Christiane again, also Wendy Hall, for this, what I'd like to be a fantastic morning. Thank you so much.